What if I told you that before human history even began, Earth was ruled by just 8 kings, and their reign lasted for 241,200 years? This isn't a fantasy novel. It's written in one of the oldest texts ever discovered, an ancient Sumerian document that names each of these immortal rulers. We're talking about kings who held the throne for 28,000 years and 36,000 years at a time. They watched empires rise and fall under their command, moving their capital across a prehistoric world, until it all came crashing down in one catastrophic event, the Great Flood. The story we all know might not be the beginning, but the end of their world. Everything you've been taught about the dawn of human civilization is probably wrong. The neat timeline you learned in school, the one that starts about 6,000 years ago with the first cities and the invention of writing in Mesopotamia, is just the final chapter of a much older, stranger, and far more epic story. The evidence for this isn't hidden in some secret vault. It's been sitting in a museum for a century, inscribed on a small, unassuming block of baked clay. This artifact, no bigger than a modern paperback book, systematically dismantles our entire understanding of human history. It's called the Weld-Blundell Prism, and it contains a document known as the Sumerian King List. It doesn't just suggest our history is older than we think. It states, in cold, hard, factual terms, that before a catastrophic global flood, just 8 kings ruled over humanity for a staggering 241,200 years. If you enjoy exploring historical mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Prepare yourselves, let's dive in. Let's rewind to 1922. In the sun-scorched plains of modern-day Iraq, a British archaeological expedition, led by Herbert Weld-Blundell, was excavating the ruins of the ancient Sumerian city of Larsa. Amidst the rubble and dust, they found it, a 4-sided clay prism, covered from top to bottom in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of the Sumerians. When it was finally translated, scholars were baffled. They expected another record of grain harvests, trade deals, or temple hymns. Instead, they found a meticulously organised list of rulers, their capital cities, and the length of their reigns. The style wasn't poetic or mythological. It was written with the dry precision of an accountant or a court scribe. It reads like a ledger, a factual record. But the facts it records are impossible. The list begins with a simple yet world-altering statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The first king of Eridu, it says, was named Alulim. He ruled for 28,800 years. The second king, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000 years. The third, Enmenlu-Ana, held the throne for 43,200 years. The list continues through 8 kings in 5 different cities, each reign lasting for tens of thousands of years. The scribe then tallies the total, 8 kings, their reigns summing to 241,200 years. And then the list comes to an abrupt, chilling halt with a single stark sentence. Then the flood swept over. To the modern mind, these numbers are absurd. No human being can live for 28,000 years, let alone rule for that long. The immediate reaction from mainstream historians was to dismiss this entire section as pure fantasy, a creation myth no different from tales of giants or dragons. They labelled these early rulers as mythological figures, and their reigns as symbolic. It was a neat and tidy explanation that allowed history to begin safely after the flood. But the prism held a secret that made this easy dismissal impossible. Because after that line about the flood, the list picks right back up. It names new kings in new cities, but now the reigns are dramatically shorter. A few hundred years, then just over a century, then a few decades. Suddenly the numbers become believable, and that's when the real bombshell drops. The post-flood section of the list names kings who we know, through other texts and archaeological discoveries, were real historical figures. Most famously, it lists Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose epic is one of the world's oldest pieces of literature and whose city walls have been physically unearthed. This creates an inescapable paradox. If the later part of the Sumerian King List is accepted as a genuine historical record, how can we so confidently dismiss the first part? The same scribe, using the same matter-of-fact tone, wrote down both. The document makes no distinction between the mythical kings who ruled for 43,000 years and the historical kings who ruled for 43. It presents them all as part of a single, continuous history, interrupted only by a great flood. To ignore the first half is to tear a document in two and claim only the piece we like is authentic. This forces us to ask a terrifying question. What if the list isn't a myth at all? What if it's a memory? The mystery deepens when you look at the math. The impossibly long reigns aren't just random, exaggerated numbers. They follow a precise pattern based on the Sumerian sexagesimal, base 60 system of mathematics. Their highest unit of time was called a sar, which represented 3,600 years. Look at the reigns again through this lens. Alulim's reign of 28,800 years is exactly 8 sars. Alalgar's 36,000 years is exactly 10 sars. Enmenluana's 43,200 years is exactly 12 sars. This isn't the work of a storyteller pulling numbers out of thin air. This is a calculated, deliberate system. The scribes were recording something they believed to be ordered and precise. But what? This leads us to two mind-bending possibilities. The first is that the numbers are symbolic, representing eras of influence or cosmic cycles. But if so, why present them as the reigns of specific named individuals? The second possibility is far more radical. What if these rulers weren't human as we know it? The list itself gives us a clue in its very first line. Kingship descended from heaven. For the Sumerians, the right to rule wasn't a human invention. It was a gift, an institution delivered to Earth from the outside. This has led some researchers to a controversial, almost unthinkable conclusion: that the King List is a record of a time when Earth was governed by non-human entities, beings whose biology, or perhaps technology, allowed for lifespans that make a mockery of our own. In the background of this theory looms a single powerful name from the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki, a term often translated as those who from heaven to earth came. The Weld Blundell prism is not a standalone fantasy. At least 16 other fragments of the King List have been found across Mesopotamia, in cities like Nippur and Kish, all telling the same core story. It was a foundational, accepted history for the people who invented civilization. They believed without question that their world was born from an age of godlike kings, an age that ended in a world-destroying flood. This clay prism, therefore, doesn't just ask us to reconsider the timeline of history. It forces us to question the very nature of our past and the identity of those who first sat on a throne on planet Earth. It presents a history divided into two distinct acts: the world before the water and the world after. And our journey begins in that lost world before the flood, as we explore the meaning behind that first fateful descent of kingship from the heavens. That single line, "Kingship descended from heaven," is more than just an ancient poetic phrase. It is a complete re-engineering of the story of human civilization. Our modern understanding, built over centuries of archaeology and anthropology, tells a story of gradual evolution. We picture small bands of hunter-gatherers slowly settling down, learning agriculture, forming villages. And over thousands of years, these villages grew into towns, and towns into the first cities. In this model, government and kingship were a natural bottom-up invention, a necessary tool created by humans to manage increasingly complex problems, like irrigation, food storage, and defence. It was a human solution to human problems. The Sumerian King List throws this entire model into the fire. It presents a radical alternative, a top-down origin. It claims that civilization didn't painstakingly invent kingship. Instead, the institution of kingship arrived first, fully formed, as a package delivered from an external source. Civilization then crystallized around this pre-existing structure. Think about what this implies. It suggests that human society didn't develop its own operating system through trial and error. An operating system was installed. This concept fundamentally changes the role of the first rulers. They weren't just the strongest warlords or the cleverest priests who managed to seize power. They were appointees, the first CEOs of a cosmic franchise established on Earth. Their authority didn't come from the consent of the governed or the might of their armies. It came from a higher, off-world power. This is the very essence of what we now call divine right. The belief that a monarch is subject to no earthly authority, deriving the right to rule directly from the will of God. We tend to think of this as a later invention, a justification for power used by European kings in the Middle Ages. But the Sumerians are telling us it was there from the absolute beginning. The first king who ever ruled did so because he was chosen by the gods. The stage for this monumental event was a city called Eridu. For the Sumerians, Eridu wasn't just a city, it was the first city, the primordial home. Archaeological digs confirm Eridu is one of the oldest settlements in Mesopotamia, with its foundations dating back to around 5400 BCE. But what they found there is strange. The city seems to appear with a surprising level of sophistication. Deep below the sands, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a small shrine. Over centuries, this shrine was obsessively rebuilt. Again and again, each new temple larger and more elaborate than the last, built directly on top of the foundations of the old one. It's as if the inhabitants were trying to maintain a sacred connection to that specific spot on the earth, a point of contact between their world and another. Sumerian mythology tells us exactly why. Eridu was the home of Enki, the god of wisdom, knowledge, magic, and creation. Enki was often depicted as a friend to humanity, the great scientist and engineer of the gods. If kingship, with all its associated laws, sciences, and social structures, was a gift, Enki's city would be the logical delivery point. This brings us to the most provocative interpretation of descended from heaven. What if the Sumerians meant it literally? What if the Anunnaki, the gods who they said came from the sky, were not mythological figures but physical beings? Beings with advanced technology and a profound understanding of social engineering. In this scenario, the establishment of kingship was a deliberate act of intervention. Perhaps they saw early humans living in chaotic, scattered tribes and decided to impose order. They didn't just teach us how to build temples, they taught us how to build a society. They delivered the blueprints for law, for science, for writing, and for government. The first kings, then, were the local managers of this grand project, possibly even hybrids, part Anunnaki, part human, serving as the perfect intermediaries between the creators and their creation. This hypothesis, while radical, offers a startlingly neat explanation for one of archaeology's biggest puzzles: the Sumerian problem. Civilization seems to explode out of nowhere in southern Mesopotamia. Complex writing, advanced mathematics, including the base 60 system we still use to measure time and circles, astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge, and monumental architecture all appear in a remarkably short period, with few primitive antecedents. It's as if a switch was flipped. The conventional theory of slow, gradual development struggles to explain this sudden leap. But a theory of external intervention, of knowledge being given rather than learned, explains it perfectly. This idea of a heavenly mandate for rulers is not unique to Sumer. It's a foundational belief for nearly every great ancient civilization, a strange echo across cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a king, he was a living god, the earthly incarnation of the god Horus and the son of Ra. His authority was absolute because it was divine. In China, emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven. Tianming. Heaven would grant a just ruler the right to lead, and would withdraw that mandate from a corrupt one, leading to the downfall of a dynasty. In the biblical tradition, it is God who anoints kings like Saul and David, bestowing upon them the authority to rule his chosen people. Across the globe, from the Inca emperors who claim descent from the sun god Inti, to the Japanese emperors who trace their lineage to the sun goddess Amaterasu, the story is the same. True authority flows from the sky, not from the earth. Could this universal myth be a shared, distorted memory of a single event? A memory of a time when humanity's path was deliberately and directly altered by non-human intelligence. The Sumerian King List doesn't just suggest this, it presents it as the opening fact of its historical record. It states plainly that our story as a civilized species did not begin with a human idea. It began with a divine directive. The implications are staggering. It means that the very structures that govern our lives, laws, hierarchies, and the concentration of power, may not be human inventions at all. They might be alien. We are left facing a choice between two realities. Either kingship descended from heaven is the most successful piece of political propaganda ever invented, a myth created to legitimize earthly rulers, or it is the literal truth, a 4,000-year-old memory of the moment our world was forever changed by contact. The prism gives us our first clue by naming the very first king to hold this divine mandate in the sacred city of Eridu, a ruler named Alulim. In the sacred primordial city of Eridu, the Sumerian King List tells us that the celestial gift of kingship was bestowed upon its first recipient, a king named Alulim. With this act, the clock of civilization begins to tick. The list is starkly simple in its description. It offers no tales of his coronation, no epic poems about his battles, no hymns praising his wisdom. It states only his name, his city, and a number that defies all human experience. Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. This isn't just a long reign, it's a span of time so vast it contains all of recorded human history. From the building of the pyramids to the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. 3 times over. To our modern sensibilities, this number is the ultimate proof that Alulim is a myth. But to the Sumerians, the number itself was proof of his legitimacy. As we saw, 28,800 is precisely 8 sars, 8 cycles of 3,600 years. It was a perfect, cosmically significant number, signalling a reign in harmony with the order of the heavens. To even try and comprehend this, we must detach from our own sense of time. Imagine a king who did not age as we do, a ruler who was a constant, unyielding presence as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of generations of his subjects were born, lived their lives, and died. For the people of Eridu, Alulim wouldn't have been a man. He would have been a geological feature, as permanent as the river and as eternal as the sun. This absolute stability would have cemented the idea of kingship as a divine, unshakable institution. How could anyone question a system whose leader had presided over their civilization since time immemorial? His very existence was the ultimate proof that the kingship he held was not of this world. This is where the Anunnaki theory provides a compelling, if unsettling, framework. If Alulim was not a human king but an Anunnaki governor, or a genetically modified human-Anunnaki hybrid with an extended lifespan, the 28,800-year reign shifts from being a mythological impossibility to a simple statement of fact from a non-human perspective. After Alulim's epic reign concluded, the King List tells us kingship remained in Eridu. The throne passed to a second ruler, Alalgar, and his reign was even longer, 36,000 years, a perfect 10 sars. The pattern continues. Alalgar, like Alulim, is a ghost in the historical record. No stories of his deeds survive, only his name and his impossible number. His reign reinforces the theme of cosmic order and stability. He wasn't remembered for changing the world, but for maintaining it. For 36 millennia, he was the anchor, the shepherd who kept the flock. Together, these first 2 kings ruled from Eridu for a combined 64,800 years. To put that in perspective, the last great ice age ended only about 11,700 years ago. According to this document, the city of Eridu was a stable, continuously governed political entity for a period of time longer than Homo sapiens has practiced agriculture. This forces us to look again at Eridu. Was it just a collection of mud brick huts, or was it something more? As archaeologists dug deeper, they found that the city's central temple, rebuilt over and over, contained unusual artifacts. In the deepest, oldest layers, they found vast quantities of fish bones piled up as if in offering. This aligns perfectly with Sumerian myth, which states that Eridu was the home of Enki, a god who is often depicted as emerging from the sweet waters, the Abzu, and whose symbol was a fish. The myths tell of strange beings who came from the sea to teach humanity the arts of civilization. One text describes the Apkallu, 7 semi-divine sages who were sent by Enki before the flood to give culture to mankind. They were described as being adorned with the bodies of fish. Is it possible that Alulim and Alalgar were remembered as these Apkallu, these civilizing teachers from another realm? Let's entertain a conspiracy. What if Eridu was more than just the first city? What if it was the first Earth base, a colonial outpost established by the Anunnaki? Its location on the edge of the Persian Gulf, in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, would have been ideal. It provided access to water, resources, and a location from which to expand. The impossibly long reigns of its first 2 kings would then represent the initial, stable period of this off-world project, a time of direct oversight before the operation expanded. In this view, Eridu was the original Eden, not a garden but a controlled environment, a city-state where the grand experiment of human civilization began under the watchful eyes of its non-human creators. When the King List states that after Alalgar's reign, Eridu was abandoned and its kingship was taken to Bad Tibira, it signals a major shift in the story. This wasn't the collapse of a city, it reads like a planned, strategic relocation. The headquarters moved. Why? The name of the new capital, Bad Tibira, gives us a clue. It translates as Wall of the Coppersmiths, or Fortress of the Metalworkers. The focus of the entire antediluvian project was about to change. It was moving from the watery realm of Enki and the establishment of civilization to something more industrial, more tangible. The age of philosophy and law was ending, and the age of the forge was about to begin. But the legacy of Eridu and its 2 phantom kings endured. They established the precedent. They were the alpha and omega of the first phase of history, a period of unimaginable length and stability that laid the foundation for everything that followed. They are names without stories, but their numbers tell a story of their own, a story of time on a scale that is not human, and of a power that was not born on Earth. They were the gardeners who planted the first seeds of kingship in the soil of our planet. When kingship was relocated from the sacred city of Eridu, it wasn't just a change of address, it was a change in mission. The new capital, Bad Tibira, the fortress of the metalworkers, signals a shift from the quiet establishment of civilization to a new, fiery era of industry and transformation. This is where the Anunnaki project, if we dare to call it that, kicks into high gear. The first king to rule from this industrial hub was Enmenlu-Ana. His reign, according to the prism, lasted for 43,200 years. This number is incredibly specific and deeply significant. It is exactly 12 Sars. In Sumerian cosmology, and indeed in many ancient traditions, the number 12 represents completion and cosmic order. 12 months in a year, 12 houses of the zodiac. His reign symbolised a perfect, complete cycle of celestial and earthly power. But the power in Bad Tibira was tangible. It glowed in the heat of furnaces and rang with the sound of hammers. To the ancients, metallurgy was not just a craft. It was a form of magic, a divine art. To pull dull rock from the earth and through fire and secret knowledge, transform it into gleaming, indestructible metal was to imitate the gods themselves. This was the ultimate act of creation, and Bad Tibira was its global centre. Under Enmenlu-Ana, humanity was not just being governed, it was being taught how to master the physical world. This aligns with chilling precision to the core thesis of researchers like Zechariah Sitchin. He argued the Anunnaki came to Earth for one primary reason: to mine its precious metals, specifically gold, which they needed to repair the atmosphere of their home planet, Nibiru. In this scenario, Bad Tibira wasn't just a capital city, it was a massive industrial refinery. Enmenluana wasn't a human king. He was the Anunnaki site director, overseeing a mining and processing operation of planetary scale for over 43 millennia. After Enmenluana's great cycle of 12 Sars was complete, kingship remained in the city of the Forge, passing to a ruler named Enmen-Gal-Ana. His reign is listed as 28,800 years, or 8 Sars, the exact same duration as Alulim, the very first king. This repetition is deliberate. It signals that after an age of intense industrial development, it was time for a new beginning, a period of consolidation, and the implementation of a different kind of technology, social technology. While Enmenluana mastered matter, Enmen-Gal-Ana's role was to master society. His legacy is tied to one of the most fascinating and mysterious concepts in Sumerian thought, the sacred me. The me were a set of divine decrees or universal laws, often described as physical objects, perhaps tablets or data crystals, that held the blueprints for every single aspect of a high civilization. They were me for kingship, for priesthood, justice, writing, music, weaving, mathematics, even for complex concepts like truth and deceit. They were the divine software for civilization. Sumerian myth says the me were owned by the great god Enki, who kept them in his city of Eridu. Enmen-Gal-Ana's reign suggests a period where these foundational principles were disseminated and encoded into the fabric of society from the new capital of Bad Tibira. He was the guardian of the cosmic laws, the king who ensured that the new industrial power was balanced by divine order. From an Anunnaki perspective, the me could be seen as a literal database, a complete instruction set for building a functioning, controlled society, handed down to a chosen administrator to ensure the human workforce remained organised and productive. After these 2 long, stable reigns dedicated to industry and order, the story takes a sharp and deeply human turn. The final king to rule from Bad Tibira was Dumuzid, whose reign is listed as 36,000 years, or 10 Sars. But unlike the silent administrative figures before him, Dumuzid leaps from the clay prism and into the heart of mythology. He is remembered not just as a king, but as Dumuzid the Shepherd. More importantly, he is the central figure in one of history's most enduring and influential stories, the myth of the dying and rising god. The story, told in passionate poems and laments, is a cosmic tragedy. Dumuzid was the lover of the powerful goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar. When Inanna descended into the underworld and was trapped there, a substitute had to be found for her to be released. Demonic figures came for Dumuzid, and despite his attempts to hide, he was captured and dragged down into the land of the dead. His death plunged the world into sorrow and infertility. Inanna, consumed by grief, eventually arranged for him to return to the world of the living for half of every year. His annual death marked the coming of the dry, barren summer, and his return in the spring brought back fertility and new life. Dumuzid is the archetype. He is the original blueprint for Osiris in Egypt, for Tammuz in Babylon, Adonis in Greece, and Mithras in Rome. This narrative of a divine figure who dies and is resurrected, whose fate is tied to the salvation and renewal of the world, became a foundational pillar of religion across the ancient world. Even the central story of Christianity, that of a divine shepherd who sacrifices himself and rises again, echoes the tale of Dumuzid, first told millennia earlier. This presents an incredible puzzle. How did a king from a pre-flood list, who supposedly ruled for 36,000 years, become the subject of such a deeply personal and emotional myth? Was he a real, unimaginably ancient ruler whose tragic death was later mythologized into a story about the seasons? Or was he always a mythological figure, a personification of the agricultural cycle, who was later inserted into the king list to give him a historical pedigree? The Sumerian scribes saw no contradiction. For them, he was both, a historical king of an ancient age and a god whose passion played out in the sky and the soil every year. With the end of his reign, the era of Bad Tibira, the city of fire, law, and passion, concluded. The King List states that kingship would move once more, this time to a mysterious city named Larak, a place that, unlike Eridu, has never been found. After the fiery industrial age of Bad Tibira, the transfer of kingship marks another enigmatic shift in the antediluvian narrative. The new capital was Larak, a city that exists only as a name on the clay prism. Despite extensive archaeological surveys in Iraq, no ruins of Larak have ever been conclusively identified. It is a ghost city, a capital of a forgotten kingdom that has left no physical trace. This has led to speculation that Larak was either completely obliterated by the flood, or that its name was a stand-in for a location whose true nature was meant to be kept secret. Perhaps a command centre, a scientific outpost, or a place of judgment. The sole king to rule from this lost city was Inscribed Zid Ana. His reign is recorded as 28,800 years, another perfect 8 Sars, mirroring the reigns of the first king, Alulim, and the lawgiver king, Enmen Gal Ana. This specific number suggests his reign was one of balance, order, and cosmic stability, a return to foundational principles after the dramatic and emotional era of Dumuzid. While the King List is silent on his deeds, later Sumerian texts connect the city of Larak with the god Ninurta, a powerful warrior deity who was also the god of farming and healing. He was a divine enforcer, a bringer of both destructive floods and life-giving irrigation. This duality suggests that Larak's purpose, and Inscribed Zid Ana's long reign, may have been about maintaining the delicate balance of the planet's systems. He may have been the king of law and order, not just for society, but for nature itself. In the Anunnaki framework, this could represent a period of planetary management. After decades of intensive mining and industrial activity in Bad Tibira, perhaps a long period of ecological stabilisation and control was required. Inscribed Zid Ana's reign, from his hidden capital, could have been that of a divine environmental regulator, managing the climate, the waters, and the agriculture that sustained the human population for nearly 30 millennia. His obscurity and the hidden nature of his city would have been essential for such a critical, behind-the-scenes role. When his reign concluded, kingship moved to its 4th capital, the city of Sippar. Sippar is another real city, whose ruins have been found and excavated. It was famous throughout the ancient world as a major centre for the worship of the sun god, Utu, later known as Shamash in Babylonian. Utu was not only the god of the sun, but also the supreme god of justice and divination. It was said he could see everything that happened on earth during the day, making him the ultimate judge. The king who ruled from Sippar, Enmen-Dur-Ana, is one of the most intriguing figures in the entire list. He reigned for 21,000 years, a period of just under 6 Sars. But it's not the length of his reign that makes him famous. It's the story of his destiny. Later Mesopotamian texts claim that Enmen-Dur-Ana was summoned to heaven by the gods Utu and Adad. There he was seated on a golden throne, taught the secrets of the cosmos, the science of divination, how to observe oil on water, and how to read the liver of sacrificed animals to foretell the future. He was essentially initiated into the divine council and then sent back to Earth to establish the priestly class who would carry this knowledge. His story is a direct parallel to the much more famous biblical figure of Enoch, of whom the book of Genesis says, Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Like Enoch, Enmen-Dur-Ana did not die, he ascended. This story represents the most direct link between the earthly kings and their heavenly patrons. It's a literal account of knowledge transfer. The secrets of the universe were not discovered. They were revealed. For conspiracy theorists, Enmen-Dur-Ana's story is a smoking gun. To be taken up to heaven is interpreted not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a physical event. Was he taken aboard a spacecraft, transported to an orbital station, or even another planet, educated in advanced sciences and then returned to his people as a prophet king? The secrets he was taught, astronomy, mathematics, and methods of prediction could be seen as simplified versions of advanced technology and probability science translated into ritual forms that a primitive culture could understand and preserve. His reign of 21,000 years in the city of the sun god then becomes the long era during which this celestial knowledge was disseminated, laying the groundwork for the priestly and scientific traditions that would dominate Mesopotamia for millennia. The final chapter of the antediluvian world takes place in the fifth and last capital city, Shuruppak. The king who ruled there was Ubara-Tutu. His reign is listed as 18,600 years, the shortest of all the pre-flood kings. This shortening of his reign, as if time itself was accelerating towards a final conclusion, is a dramatic foreshadowing of the end. Like the other kings, the list tells us nothing of his deeds, but his significance is monumental, for he was the last king of the old world. His name is forever linked to the coming cataclysm because of his famous son. While the king list doesn't name him, other texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh identify Ubara-Tutu as the father of Utnapishtim, the man who would become the Sumerian Noah. The story is eerily familiar. The gods, led by the angry Enlil, decide to destroy humanity with a great flood, but the wise god Enki, who had a hand in humanity's creation, secretly warns Utnapishtim. He tells him to dismantle his house and build a massive boat, a cube-shaped ark, and to load it with his family and the seed of all living things. Ubara-Tutu's reign, therefore, was the calm before the storm. He was the king who presided over the final years of a civilization that had endured for nearly 250,000 years, unaware that it was living on borrowed time. His son would become the sole thread of continuity, the man who would carry the legacy of the antediluvian world through the watery abyss and into the new world that would rise from its ashes. With the end of Ubara-Tutu's rule, the list of impossibly long-lived kings concludes. The age of gods on earth was over. The sky was about to fall. Then the flood swept over. With that one devastatingly simple sentence, the Sumerian King List closes the book on an entire epoch of existence. After meticulously recording 241,200 years of history, the scribe uses just 4 words to describe the event that reset the world. There is no poetic description of the rising waters, no theological explanation for the god's anger. It is presented as a cold, hard fact, a boundary line drawn across time. On one side, an age of kings with godlike lifespans. On the other, a drowned world and the dawn of a new lesser age for humanity. This event, the Great Flood, is not just a Sumerian story. It is arguably humanity's most persistent and universal myth. It appears, with breathtakingly similar details, in hundreds of cultures across the globe, from peoples who could have had no possible contact with one another. In Mesopotamia, the story is told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim describes the terrifying deluge, a storm of such violence that the gods themselves cowered in fear. In the Bible, Noah is commanded by God to build an ark to survive the waters that will cover the highest mountains. In ancient Greece, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive a flood sent by Zeus by floating in a wooden chest. In India, the Manu Vaivasvata is warned of a coming flood by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish and builds a great ship to save himself. The stories echo from the Aztecs of Mexico to the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, from the Norse myths of Scandinavia to the legends of the native peoples of North and South America. All tell of a time when the world was consumed by water, and a handful of chosen people survived to repopulate the earth. For a long time, historians dismissed this as a simple flood myth, a common story for early civilizations who lived by rivers and feared their destructive power. But the sheer global ubiquity of the tale suggests something more profound. Could this be a shared species-wide memory of a real, planet-altering cataclysm? The geological record provides a startling answer. Yes. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a period known as the Younger Dryas began. The Earth, which had been gradually warming, was suddenly plunged back into near glacial conditions. The cause of this sudden climate shift is the subject of intense scientific debate, but one of the leading theories is the impact of one or more comets over the North American ice sheet. The immense heat from the impacts would have instantly vaporised a massive amount of ice, while also destabilising the entire ice sheet, leading to a catastrophic meltwater pulse into the world's oceans. The result would have been a rapid sea level rise on a global scale, mega tsunamis and coastal flooding that would have wiped out any civilization living near the shore. This is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and it provides a terrifyingly plausible scientific basis for the myth of a worldwide flood. Archaeology provides another piece of the puzzle. Excavations in southern Iraq, at the site of the ancient city of Shuruppak, the final antediluvian capital, uncovered a thick uniform layer of river silt, nearly 10 feet deep in some places, dating to around 2900 BCE. This flood layer cleanly separates the earlier strata of the city from the later ones. The city was clearly hit by a devastating flood that interrupted its history. While this specific event was a regional river flood, not a global cataclysm, its memory may have merged with the older, deeper memory of the Younger Dryas event to create the epic flood myth we know today. The Sumerian King List, however, treats the flood as more than just a natural disaster. It is a fundamental turning point in the nature of reality. Before the flood, kings were, for all intents and purposes, immortal. After the flood, they became human. The lifespans recorded on the prism contract dramatically, from tens of thousands of years to mere centuries, and then to the familiar lifespans of today. It's as if the flood washed away not just cities, but a specific kind of biological or spiritual longevity. The Bible mirrors this exact idea. Before the flood, patriarchs like Methuselah lived for nearly a millennium. After the flood, God explicitly shortens the human lifespan, declaring in Genesis 6:3, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." Both traditions record a deliberate, divine nerfing of humanity in the flood's aftermath. From the perspective of the Anunnaki theory, the flood takes on an even more sinister and deliberate character. Was it an accident of nature that they simply allowed to happen? Or was it a tool, a controlled demolition? Some theorists propose that the Anunnaki themselves triggered the cataclysm, perhaps by using advanced technology to destabilise the Antarctic ice sheet, as a way to wipe the slate clean. In this version of the story, humanity had become unruly, or perhaps the hybridisation experiment had produced undesirable results. The flood was a reset button, a way to eliminate the majority of the population and start over with a more manageable group of survivors. The story of Enki secretly warning Utnapishtim then becomes an act of rebellion, a compassionate scientist saving his creation from his more ruthless colleagues. This interpretation paints the flood not as an act of God, but as an act of industrial-scale genocide. The survivors, like Utnapishtim, were not just lucky, they were chosen. They were the genetic stock selected to rebuild the world, perhaps with new built-in limitations, like a shorter lifespan, to ensure they would never again challenge their creators. Regardless of its cause, the flood serves as the great filter of human history. It separates myth from verifiable records, gods from men, and an age of impossible longevity from our own fleeting mortal existence. It is the scar on our collective psyche, a memory of a time when the world we knew was completely and utterly erased. When the waters finally receded, the world was new, but it was also diminished. The direct link to the heavens seemed to have been severed. Humanity was, for the first time, on its own, and it would be up to a new breed of king to lead them out of the mud. When the waters of the Great Flood receded, they left behind a world scoured clean, a blank slate upon which a new history would be written. The Sumerian King List marks this new beginning with the same dispassionate tone it used to describe the end. After the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The age of godlike kings was over. The new era belonged to men. The reigns listed now are dramatically shorter, more believable. The first post-flood dynasty in the city of Kish has kings who rule for 960, 840, or 300 years, still incredibly long by our standards, but a tiny fraction of the reigns before the flood. And as the list moves forward in time, the numbers continue to shrink until they become entirely plausible historical reigns of 20, 30, or 40 years. It is in this new, more grounded reality that we meet the single most important figure on the entire prism, Gilgamesh, the fifth king of the first dynasty of Uruk. The king list records his reign with its usual brevity. The divine Gilgamesh, his reign was 126 years. But unlike the silent phantoms of the antediluvian age, Gilgamesh explodes out of the cuneiform and into history as a fully formed character. He is the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, an epic poem that predates Homer's Iliad by at least 1,500 years. His story, pieced together from fragments of clay tablets, tells of a powerful, arrogant king who is 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a demigod who rules his city with an iron fist. To humble him, the gods create a wild man, Enkidu, who becomes his rival, then his best friend. Together they embark on heroic adventures, slaying monsters and defying the gods. But when Enkidu is condemned to die as punishment, Gilgamesh is shattered by grief and for the first time confronted with his own mortality. This is where his story becomes a crucial bridge between the two halves of the king list. Terrified of death, Gilgamesh embarks on a desperate quest for immortality. He decides to seek out the one man who is said to have escaped death, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. After a long and perilous journey to the ends of the earth, he finds the ancient sage. Utnapishtim then tells Gilgamesh the entire story of the flood from a first-person perspective. The god's decision, the secret warning from Enki, the construction of the ark, the terrifying storm, the landing on the mountain, and the divine gift of eternal life that he and his wife were granted. Gilgamesh is listening to a direct, living link to the world before the flood. The story confirms that the events described by the king list were understood by the Mesopotamians not as myth, but as a real event in their history. Utnapishtim is the living proof. But when Gilgamesh begs for the secret to eternal life, Utnapishtim tells him the hard truth. That gift was a one-time deal. The age of immortals is over. The gods have decreed that for mankind, death is the ultimate fate. In this single, poignant moment, the epic confirms the great reset described by the king list. The bridge to the past is there, but the door is closed. Gilgamesh, despite being 2/3 divine, is locked into the new, mortal reality. He ultimately fails in his quest and returns to his city of Uruk, having learned the bitter lesson that true immortality can only be found in the great deeds and lasting works one leaves behind. For a long time, scholars believed Gilgamesh was a purely mythological character, like Hercules or King Arthur. But then, archaeology began to catch up with the myth. In the 19th and 20th centuries, excavators unearthed the sprawling ruins of the ancient city of Uruk, one of the first true cities in world history. They found massive city walls, just as the epic described, and historical inscriptions that named other kings from Gilgamesh's dynasty listed on the prism. Gilgamesh's name itself appears in other contemporary texts as a real, historical king. He wasn't a myth, he was a memory, a real ruler whose life and deeds were so extraordinary that they became the foundation for centuries of legend. This is what makes Gilgamesh the linchpin of the entire Sumerian king list. He is the anchor that moors the seemingly fantastical first half of the document to the verifiable reality of the second half. Because Gilgamesh is real, it forces us to take the entire list more seriously. The scribe who recorded Gilgamesh's reign of 126 years is the same one who recorded Elulim's reign of 28,800 years. To the author, they were both equally historical. Gilgamesh's part divine nature, 2/3 god, 1/3 man, also serves as a tantalizing clue. Was this a poetic description of his immense power, or a literal memory of the Anunnaki legacy? He could be seen as a product of the tail end of the hybridization program, a descendant of the divine bloodlines that had become diluted over time. His quest for immortality wasn't just a metaphor for the human condition. It was a literal attempt to reclaim the birthright of his ancestors, the longevity that was lost in the flood. His failure marks the final, tragic end of that connection. After Gilgamesh, the divine spark seems to fade, and the kings of Mesopotamia become fully, tragically human. He stands on the shoreline between history and myth, one foot in the world of gods and one in the world of men, the perfect hero for an age of transition. The story etched into the Sumerian King List of a lost age of impossibly long-lived rulers brought to an end by a world-altering flood would be astonishing enough if it were an isolated tale. But it's not. The same narrative framework, a golden age of longevity, a great cataclysm, followed by a new era of shortened human lifespans, appears like a persistent echo in the foundational texts of other major civilizations. It's as if the core components of this Sumerian memory were smuggled out of the flood on different arcs, preserved in the oral traditions of the survivors, and eventually written down in different languages and different lands. The most striking and well-known parallel is found in the early chapters of the Book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. The Bible's list of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah reads like a direct, albeit condensed echo of the Sumerian antediluvian kings. Adam is said to have lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912 years. His grandson Enos lived 905 years. The list continues for 10 generations, culminating in the most famous long-lived figure of all, Methuselah, who reached the age of 969. While these lifespans are counted in centuries rather than the Sumerian millennia, the underlying principle is identical. Before the flood, humans lived for extraordinarily long periods of time. The Bible even has its own Enoch, a man who walked with God and was taken directly to heaven without dying, a story that mirrors the Sumerian king Enmen-dur-Ana of Sippar, who also ascended to the heavens. Then, just like in the Sumerian record, the flood comes and acts as a great dividing line. After Noah and the Ark, lifespans begin a steady and dramatic decline. The post-flood patriarchs like Abraham live for 175 years, Moses for 120, and by the time of King David, the psalmist declares the human lifespan to be a mere 70 or 80 years. The narrative arc is precisely the same as the King List, a lost golden age of longevity, a watery cataclysm, and a new diminished world. For centuries, scholars explained this away by suggesting the Hebrew authors, during their exile in Babylon in the 6th century BCE, simply borrowed and adapted Mesopotamian myths. But the similarities may run deeper than literary theft. What if both the Sumerian and Hebrew texts are drawing from a common, much older source of memory, a shared historical tradition about the true nature of the world before the flood, passed down by different branches of survivors? The echo doesn't stop in the Middle East. In ancient Egypt, the historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, compiled a history of his country's dynasties. Like the Sumerian King List, his work begins with a lost primordial age. He lists a series of divine beings, gods and demigods, who ruled Egypt for a period totaling thousands of years before the first mortal pharaoh, Menes, unified the country. The famous Turin King Papyrus, a badly damaged document from the reign of Rameses II, confirms this tradition, beginning its list of rulers with dynasties of gods who reigned for vast, mythological spans of time. Once again, we see the same pattern, a belief in a real, historical epoch when divine or semi-divine beings ruled the land for periods far exceeding human lifespans, an age that preceded the historical dynasties. The pattern repeats with almost monotonous regularity across the globe. In ancient India, Hindu cosmology describes a cycle of 4 great yugas, or ages. The first and most perfect age, the Satya Yuga, was a golden era where humans were said to be gigantic, powerful, and lived for 100,000 years. As each successive yuga unfolds, humanity's lifespan, virtue, and physical stature decline, leading to our current, degraded age, the Kali Yuga. In China, ancient legends speak of a series of sage kings and divine emperors who ruled in the dawn of time, bringing the gifts of civilization and living for hundreds of years. The Yellow Emperor, for example, was said to have reigned for a century. What are we to make of this global consensus? Is it simply a universal human tendency to romanticize the past, to invent a golden age of giants and gods? Or is it a genuine, deeply ingrained memory, a piece of historical data that has been preserved in the amber of myth? If it is a memory, then the Sumerian King List is simply the most detailed and bureaucratic version of it that has survived. It suggests that the antediluvian civilization it describes was not a local Mesopotamian phenomenon, but a global one. The kingship that descended from heaven may have been a planetary system of governance. The flood in this context becomes an event that shattered a connected world, throwing the survivors into a dark age. In their isolation, each group preserved the memory of the before times, the antediluvian world, in their own unique way, but the core elements remain the same. This theory offers a radical new lens through which to view ancient myths. They are not just fanciful stories. They are corrupted data files, fragmented historical records of a lost chapter of human history. The gods of the Greeks, the Devas of the Hindus, the Elohim of the Bible, and the Anunnaki of the Sumerians could all be different names for the same group of powerful, long-lived beings who governed the planet before the Great Reset. The Sumerian King List, in its dry numerical precision, may be the closest thing we have to the original, uncorrupted master file of that forgotten age. It provides the names, the locations, and the precise timeline that other cultures only remembered in the dreamlike language of myth. It's the historical backbone upon which the world's mythologies were built. The Sumerian King List presents us with a set of facts that are fundamentally irreconcilable with our understanding of history. The mainstream explanations that the long reigns are merely symbolic, or that the entire pre-flood section is pure myth, begin to feel inadequate. They are explanations that dismiss the evidence rather than engage with it. They crumble under the sheer mathematical precision of the reigns and the uncanny parallels in global mythology. To truly confront the mystery, we need a theory that takes the document at its word. In the 1970s, a rogue scholar named Zechariah Sitchin did exactly that. He proposed a breathtaking, all-encompassing theory that reframed the entire history of the human race. To Sitchin, the King List wasn't a myth. It was a heavily redacted corporate history of an extraterrestrial intervention on planet Earth. Sitchin was a scholar fluent in Sumerian and other ancient Semitic languages. As he read the cuneiform texts, he claimed to find a story that all other translators had missed or willfully ignored. The key, he said, was a single misunderstood celestial body. The Sumerians had a deep and complex understanding of astronomy, recognizing the sun, the moon, and the planets out to Saturn. But Sitchin claimed their texts spoke of one more, a massive, undiscovered 12th member of our solar system, counting the sun and moon, which he called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. According to his translations, Nibiru was not in a stable circular orbit like the other planets. Instead, it moved in a vast, elliptical path that brought it through the inner solar system only once every 3,600 Earth years, before flinging it back out into the darkness of deep space. That number, 3,600 years, was Sitchin's Rosetta Stone. It was a perfect, stunning match for the Sumerian unit of time known as the Sar, the very unit used to calculate the impossibly long reigns of the antediluvian kings. Suddenly, the numbers on the king list snapped into focus. The reigns of 28,800 years, 8 Sars, or 43,200 years, 12 Sars, were not symbolic counts of Earth years. They were literal counts of Nibiru's orbital periods. The scribes were using the calendar of the gods, not the calendar of men. The beings who ruled before the flood, Sitchin argued, were the inhabitants of Nibiru. They were the Anunnaki, a term he translated literally as those who from heaven to earth came. But why did they come? Sitchin's answer was not for exploration or conquest, but for survival. Nibiru's atmosphere was failing, and their scientists determined that suspending fine particles of gold in their upper stratosphere could shield the planet and save their civilization. The problem was, Nibiru was pouring gold, but there was one planet on their long orbital path that was rich in it: Earth. So, around 450,000 years ago, Sitchin claimed, the Anunnaki launched a colonial expedition to Earth. They came not as gods, but as miners. They established their first base in the Mesopotamian basin, a place they called Edin, the home of the righteous ones, and began the arduous process of extracting gold. This explains the shift in the king list from the sacred city of Eridu to the industrial centre of Bad Tibira, the fortress of the metalworkers. This leads to Sitchin's most shocking and controversial claim. The rank-and-file Anunnaki eventually mutinied against the back-breaking labour in the mines. The leaders, brilliant genetic engineers named Enki and Ninhursag, came up with a solution. They would create a primitive worker, a slave race, to do the digging for them. They didn't create life from scratch. They took the most advanced primate already on the planet, Homo erectus, and upgraded its DNA with their own. Through a process of in vitro fertilization, using an Anunnaki surrogate mother, they created the first Homo sapiens. They called their creation the Adamu, the Earthling, the first Adam. We were, in Sitchin's view, bioengineered to be slaves. The Sumerian King List, in this context, becomes the administrative record of this long-term colonial project. The antediluvian kings, Alulim, Alalgar, and the rest, were the Anunnaki commanders in charge of the Earth mission, their reigns measured in their home planet's long year. Kingship descending from heaven was a literal memory of their arrival and the establishment of their command structure. The flood was a known recurring natural disaster caused by the gravitational pull of Nibiru passing through the solar system, which periodically caused the Antarctic ice sheet to slip into the ocean. The Anunnaki leader Enlil saw the coming flood as a chance to wipe out their unruly human creation, while the scientist Enki, who had a fondness for his creation, secretly arranged for his human son, Utnapishtim, to survive. After the flood, most of the Anunnaki left, leaving humanity to govern itself under the guidance of kings who were descended from Anunnaki-human hybrid bloodlines, like Gilgamesh, the two-thirds god. To mainstream academia, Sitchin's work is pseudo-history, built on forced translations and wild speculation. Astronomers have found no verifiable evidence of a planet like Nibiru, but to his millions of followers, Sitchin is the man who cracked the code. His theory, whether right or wrong, is undeniably powerful because of its breathtaking scope. It takes all the disconnected, baffling pieces of the ancient past, the king list's numbers, the sudden explosion of Sumerian civilization, the global flood myth, the biblical stories of Genesis, the concept of gods who walk the earth, and snaps them together into a single, coherent and magnificent picture. It transforms ancient myth into a misunderstood history of advanced technology, genetic engineering, and cosmic politics. It tells us that the gods were real, they were extraterrestrial, and their legacy is written not just on clay tablets, but in our very DNA. If the Sumerian King List is not a myth, but a memory, whether of long-lived divine kings or extraterrestrial governors, then its legacy shouldn't just be confined to ancient clay tablets. A project of such immense scale, spanning 250,000 years, and culminating in the genetic engineering of our species, would have left traces. These traces might not be obvious monuments or technologies. They could be subtler, more intimate, hidden in the very fabric of our biology, our societies, and our deepest held beliefs. The most provocative and personal of these potential legacies is the idea that the divinity of the antediluvian kings was not a metaphor, but a biological reality that may still flow, diluted, in our own veins. Consider the persistent cross-cultural concept of royal blood. For millennia, ruling families around the world have justified their power not just through divine right, but through a claim of special lineage. They insisted they were genealogically different from the common populace. The pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of Japan, and the royal houses of Europe all claim descent from gods. The term blue blood for aristocracy is often dismissed as a reference to the pale skin of European nobles, which made their veins appear bluer. But some alternative researchers propose a much older, more literal origin. They point to ancient Mesopotamian and even Vedic texts that describe the blood of the gods as being a different colour. This is linked to the idea that their blood was not iron-based, like ours, which turns red when oxygenated, but copper-based. Copper-based blood, found in terrestrial creatures like the horseshoe crab, is blue or bluish-green when oxygenated. Could the myth of blue blood be a faint, distorted memory of a time when our rulers were literally biologically different, carrying the genetic heritage of the Anunnaki? This leads us to strange anomalies in modern human genetics. One of the most famous is the Rh negative blood type. Roughly 15% of the world's population lacks the rhesus factor, a protein found in the red blood cells of the other 85%. The strange part is that the Rh negative factor appears to be a random mutation with no clear evolutionary advantage, and it can cause significant immune complications during pregnancy if an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive child. Some fringe theories propose that this isn't a mutation at all, but a genetic marker left over from an ancient, non-human lineage. Proponents point to the fact that the highest concentration of Rh negative blood is found among the Basque people of Spain and France, a population with a unique non-Indo-European language and a distinct genetic profile. Could they be the descendants of a purer, less adulterated human Anunnaki bloodline? While this is firmly in the realm of speculation, it highlights how the King List's story of divine or alien rulers forces us to look at our own biology with fresh and perhaps unsettling eyes. Beyond our blood, the legacy may be imprinted on our society. The King List states that kingship was the first institution, the foundational gift. This top-down structure of a single powerful ruler and a hierarchical society built beneath them became the default model for nearly every civilization for the next 5,000 years. Was this the most natural or efficient way for humans to organise? Or was it simply the system we were given, the only one we knew? Perhaps our millennia-long history of monarchies, empires and dictatorships is a direct inheritance of the Anunnaki command structure. Modern conspiracy theories take this idea a step further, suggesting that the Anunnaki never truly left. They simply transitioned from overt to covert rule. These theories propose that a network of elite bloodline families, the descendants of the original Anunnaki human hybrids, have been secretly controlling world events for centuries through their influence over governments, finance, and media. From the shadows, they continue to manage their human resources, steering our development according to their own long-term agenda. In this dark and compelling narrative, the presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs of today are merely the public face of a power structure that was put in place in Eridu 241,200 years ago. The legacy may also be spiritual. The King List describes an age when the divine was a physical, ruling presence on Earth. The floods severed that direct connection, leaving humanity with a profound sense of abandonment and loss. Could this be the origin of religion itself? Is our universal species-wide longing for God, for a connection to a higher power, not a psychological quirk, but a deep ancestral memory of a time when we were not alone? Are our prayers and rituals an attempt to reopen the lines of communication that were cut when the gods departed after the flood? In this view, every priest, prophet, and mystic is unknowingly trying to reclaim the legacy of kings like Enmendur-Ana, who literally walked with the gods and brought their secrets back to Earth. Our search for enlightenment is a search for a lost inheritance. Ultimately, whether we look to our biology, our politics, or our souls, the story of the Sumerian King List forces us to confront a paradigm-shifting possibility. It suggests we might be a species with amnesia. We have forgotten our own origins. We believe we are the masters of our own destiny, the product of a slow, unguided evolution. But the prism in the Ashmolean Museum holds a different story. It tells us we might be an engineered species, living in an inherited system of governance, still haunted by the memory of our long-lived non-human creators. The legacy of the Anunnaki, if real, is not something we can simply observe in a museum. It's inside us and all around us. It is the ghost in our machine. We have journeyed from a dusty clay prism to the edge of the solar system, from the dawn of civilization to the very code of our DNA. We are left standing before the Sumerian King List, an object that is simultaneously a historical record and an impossible fantasy. It is a document that balances the verifiable reality of King Gilgamesh with the incomprehensible reign of King Alulim. After analysing the text, the context, the echoes in global myth, and the radical theories it has inspired, we must confront the final, unavoidable question: what is this thing? Is it a record of gods, a history of men, or something else entirely? There is no easy answer, only a series of profound and unsettling possibilities. The first possibility is the most conventional, the one accepted by mainstream history. In this view, the King List is a political document. It was likely compiled around 2100 BCE by a Sumerian king who wanted to legitimise his own rule by creating a single, unbroken line of royal succession stretching back to the beginning of time. The antediluvian kings and their impossibly long reigns are not meant to be taken literally. They are mythological archetypes, symbols of a divine order that the current king claims to inherit. The numbers are not years, but symbolic figures representing cosmic power and completeness, based on their sophisticated base 60 mathematical system. The flood is a literary device, a mythological reset that separates the fuzzy, sacred past from the more concrete, political present. This explanation is neat, rational, and requires no challenge to our existing model of history. But it is also deeply unsatisfying. It fails to adequately explain why the numbers are so mathematically precise, why the list transitions so seamlessly from myth to history, with no change in tone, and most importantly, why this same narrative pattern appears in so many other unconnected cultures. It is an explanation that feels more like a dismissal. The second possibility is that the King List is a misunderstood history. It records real events and real rulers, but the scribes, and we in turn, have misinterpreted the data. Perhaps the kings before the flood were not individuals, but dynasties. The name Alulim might not refer to a single man, but to a long-lasting ruling house or clan that held power for 28,800 years. This would explain the longevity, but it struggles to account for the personal nature of some of the figures, like the shepherd god Dumuzid. Another variation of this theory is that the years are not years as we know them. Some have suggested they were months, or seasons, or some other smaller unit of time. But when you apply this math, the reigns become too short to be meaningful, and it breaks the elegant and deliberate pattern of the Sar, the 3,600-year cycle. This path seems to create more problems than it solves. The third possibility is the most radical, the one championed by Sitchin and others. This is the idea that the King List should be taken literally. It is an accurate, if brief, historical record of a time when Earth was under the direct governance of a technologically and biologically superior non-human species, the Anunnaki. Their lifespans, measured in thousands of years, were normal for them. The kingship that descended from heaven was their colonial administration. The creation of humanity was their solution to a labour shortage. The flood was a planetary scale event, either natural or engineered, that marked a major turning point in their project. In this view, the prism is perhaps the single most important artefact ever discovered, a direct written account of paleo contact. It tells us that we are not alone and that we have never been alone. Our civilization, our biology, our religions, all are the product of an extraterrestrial legacy. This theory is magnificent in its scope and explains almost all of the anomalies, but it rests on translations and astronomical claims that have not been verified by mainstream science. It requires a leap of faith. Ultimately, the Sumerian King List functions as a kind of cosmic Rorschach test. What you see in its cuneiform wedges reflects your own beliefs about the nature of our past and the limits of possibility? Do you see a clever piece of royal propaganda, a garbled but genuine memory of ancient human dynasties, or a factual record of our alien creators? The prism itself remains silent, offering no final answer. It simply presents its data and challenges us to make sense of it. Perhaps the true legacy of the Anunnaki and their 241,200-year reign is not a secret bloodline or a hidden history, but a question that has been baked into a piece of clay for 4,000 years. The question is this: are you certain you know the whole story? It dares us to admit the possibility that our modern scientific understanding of the past is incomplete. It whispers that there were ages before our age, worlds before our world, and that the line between God and man, between myth and history, is far blurrier than we are comfortable admitting. The 8 kings, Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenlu Ana, Enmengal Ana, Dumuzid, Ensipad Ana, Enmendur Ana, and Ubaratutu, may be gone, their cities buried under the dust of millennia. But their story, their impossible, defiant, world-shattering story survives. It survived the flood. It has survived the fall of empires. And it has survived to be read by us today, leaving us to wonder who or what once sat on the throne of planet Earth. The Sumerian King List is more than just an ancient artifact. It is a key that unlocks a hidden door in the hallway of history. Behind that door lies a world that defies our expectations, a world where time moved differently, where kings were more than human, and where our civilization's origins are tied to a gift from the heavens. The clay prism does not offer easy answers. Instead, it leaves us with a profound and unsettling legacy of questions. It forces us to reconsider the very foundations of our history, to ask if the myths we dismissed as fantasy might be the most important historical records we possess. The story it tells of a 241,200-year reign of gods, a world-destroying flood, and the birth of a new age of men is a narrative that has been echoed in our scriptures, our legends, and perhaps even our DNA. It suggests that we are a species with a forgotten past, living in the shadow of a colossal, world-spanning event that wiped our collective memory clean. Whether you choose to see the Anunnaki as literal extraterrestrial visitors, as symbolic representations of cosmic forces, or as mythological figures from a lost golden age, their story changes how we see ourselves. It presents the humbling possibility that we were not the original authors of our civilization, but inheritors of a legacy far older and stranger than we can imagine. The prism in the museum is not just a relic of the past, it is a message for the future. A message that reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing investigation, and that the greatest discoveries may lie not in digging deeper into the earth, but in looking with fresh eyes at the stories we thought we already knew. The mystery of the Sumerian kings endures, a silent 4,000-year-old challenge to everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from. If you've come this far and enjoyed the video, perhaps a gentle like and subscribe to the channel would be a wonderful way to support us. I'd appreciate your kind support if you kindly let us know where we can improve or do better. Please do let us know in the comments. For more videos like these, please do check out our latest videos as well. Till then, see you in the next one.